We are recording. Cool. Well, hey everybody, welcome back to Wisdom and Wanderlust. My name is Michael Bennett, co-founder of ExplorerX. And on behalf of the entire ExplorerX team here in the States and around the world, welcome and thanks for being with us today. We are really excited to have our friend, coach, colleague, and intercultural educator, Lena, with us today. We're going to have a really in-depth conversation around culture, cultural awareness, and how that plays a critical part in travel, and ultimately how that cultural awareness can help us better understand ourselves. So thanks for being here. Before we jump into that, a few notes for you, as always. If you are new to the ExplorerX community, please check out our website to learn more about who we are and what we do and what makes us so special and unique. That's explorer-x.com. A couple other notes. We recently launched a membership program that is chock full of benefits and really exciting ways for you to engage not only with our team, but also with the entire travel community that we've put together at ExplorerX. So definitely encourage you to check that out. And there's a link on our website, or you can go directly to explorer-x.com/join. We also launched fairly recently a destinations page that highlights some of the places around the world that are the most special and meaningful and transformational for us. So again, please, it's on the website. Please check that out and see, learn more about those places. And if you have any questions, of course, you can reach out to us. Speaking of which, we always love talking to our travelers. So whether you have a specific question about traveling or just want to say hello to us, we always love talking to our friends. So reach out to us at hello@explorer-x.com. And of course, as always, please follow us on social media at GoExplorerX.
I have a few housekeeping things before we continue on. We're going to keep this as close to an hour as possible. And as Michael said, we are recording, so it will be available afterward. We will email everyone a link. And if you have any questions as we go along, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we'll answer those questions as we go through the conversation today.
Great. Thanks, Amanda. So one thing we haven't done the past few weeks was our question of the week, but we're going to bring that back this week, and we think it's really pertinent and relevant for the topic at hand today. So our question of the week, so Robin and Amanda, is what is one cultural experience you've had while traveling that has deeply impacted your life? Amanda, I'm going to throw it to you first.
Sure. My very first international trip was in high school. I went to New Zealand, and while we were there, we visited a traditional Maori marae, which is their community meeting grounds and kind of a sacred space. And we were greeted with a welcoming ceremony and invited to come inside and learn more about their culture and traditions, and we even stayed overnight. And it was the first time that I was really immersed in a new culture. I'd never traveled internationally and grew up in the Midwest and never really experienced much outside of that before. And I loved every bit of learning about it and experiencing it. It was just kind of a pivotal moment in my life where I was truly wowed and intrigued to learn more about the Maori and but also just the world in general. And I realized how much there was to learn and experience and explore. And it was just kind of my first eye-opening experience into other cultures. And it was just super exciting for me.
Would you say, or what would you say you've taken from that and applied to your life?
That there's always more to learn. Everybody's different and but also the same. And that's so important to kind of better understand everyone and yourself, understanding that we have different ways about greeting each other. The Maori press foreheads and noses, you know, and Americans shake hands or give a hug or whatnot. And, you know, we're all different and we have these different characteristics, but we're all the same at the same time. So it was kind of this pivotal moment for me. And it's just makes you want to learn more about other cultures and other people and the way they decide to go about experiencing the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's you've heard me talk a lot about Joseph Campbell and his work and all that stuff, and it just sort of what you're saying there reminds me of a lot of what he talks about in Hero with a Thousand Faces and the Power of Myth, and just different iterations of the same story, right, repeated in different cultural contexts with different characters and different names and different but at the end of the day, so much of it is the same, and yeah, just more similar than dissimilar for sure.
Yeah.
Robin, what about you? What's one experience that you've had that has really cultural experience that has deeply impacted you?
Yeah. So the one that comes to mind is when my best friend and I were traveling through Colombia just with our backpacks in early 2019, and we had so many like hilarious, exciting, and moving moments while we were there. But one that stands out in particular was when we were just kind of en route from one place to the next on a long drive with our guide at the time, Pedro. He shared his family's story of their run-ins with FARC, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. It's that dangerous rebel group out there. And they feared for their lives and had to flee the country immediately and go live in Texas for quite some time, where they didn't know the language. They had to navigate being bullied and harassed while they were out there, and their home was raided by authorities with machine guns, and they were threatened to be deported, all of this stuff. And they were kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place. They had no success seeking asylum in the States, and they had to decide if they were to continue to live there illegally or go back to Colombia where their lives are at risk. So just all the trials and tribulations they had to navigate was just immense. And to see how him and his family are now doing so well, and they have their own like guiding business in Salento in Colombia, I was just really inspired by his resilience and perseverance. And it's one of those interactions that really puts everything in perspective. And I'm just grateful that he opened up to us about all of that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And how would you say that's impacted your day-to-day life? What have you taken from that and applied it?
Yeah, well, it's just like, it's times like those and interactions like those that it's the perspective shift that happens every once in a while, or like you'll get into like your little bubble of a world, and then you'll meet somebody with this story that just like, it just shakes everything up, and then you like, it just gets you outside of your bubble and you like realize the bigger picture. And so it's just being reminded of there's a lot more going on out there than just what's happening in your own little bubble. And just it was a perspective shift for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And that sort of reminds me of something we've said on here many times, right? But the only reliable source of action in our lives is how we see the world, right? And some of these experiences can really impact how we see ourselves and how we see the world. And then know it or not, conscious or not, that will often lead to new behaviors, right? New actions in our lives. So for me, Fred says, hello, everybody. This is Fred. For me, I would say, my time in Denmark, I spent roughly 5.5 months living in Copenhagen in grad school. And, while I had traveled quite a bit before that, spending, several weeks in Costa Rica, backpacking Europe a few times, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This was my first real extended period of time in any destination. And, it was truly eye-opening. I mean, in such a similar to what we have here in the States, but also very, very different, in terms of their approach to healthcare, education, infrastructure, taxation, the socialist system that they have. And I will say it impacted me. It really led me to think about like how we do things here, and not right or wrong, but like there are unique differences, right? And it inspired me to really reevaluate my relationship to politics, to really even day-to-day work and how we live, right? I mean, the work-life balance is critical over there. It's not something that we honor as much as I think we should here, so much. And it was 20 years ago, or well, 15 years ago, I guess it was, that I was there. but I know, and there's probably, most of this is very, very small changes, but some of them are bigger. But that experience has really impacted me in terms of how again, my view on life, work-life balance, my view on politics, my view on education. Like, I trace a lot of my current thinking and beliefs back to that experience, right? And how that really, had opened my eyes, because I was so, culturally focused and ethnocentric and all that stuff on the way we do things here. And even though I had traveled, and you learn a lot about different cultures, you meet certain people, but just really having that extended period of time there was a very powerful experience for me. So, anyway, let's get back to Lena, or let's get to Lena. She's the highlight here, and we want to transition into that. Lena is an award-winning intercultural educator. She is a coach. She is a consultant, a speaker. A million different things. And I'm not going to do the whole big bio, Lena. I want you to explain, what you're up to in the world right now yourself. But for now, thank you for being here, and we're excited to have you.
Yeah. Sorry to unmute myself.
Yeah, no worries.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
What to tell you? Well, what am I doing in the world? Yeah, so I've spent, I guess, the majority of my career, it feels weird to say that, kind of, don't feel as old as I am, but anyways, working in intercultural education in some form or another, whether it's through programming at universities or leadership development programs at international schools, or I don't know, a whole mix of ways. And recently I've started doing some coaching work too, but it's very much tied into everything that I have learned through my work in intercultural education, and then bringing in my background in psychology, sociology, anthropology. And I think maybe the common thread between all of my work is making the unconscious conscious. And just bringing things into our awareness that maybe aren't usually there.
Yeah, I love that, making the unconscious conscious, and we're going to dive into that in a little bit. But I want to start. You were born to Greek parents, is that correct?
Yeah.
Awesome. But you were born here in the States, or you were born in Greece?
In the States.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how has your experience growing up as a Greek American influenced your life, or your professional journey, or both?
Yeah, so both of my parents are from the same small village in Greece. I was born shortly after my mom got to the States. My dad had already been here for years. And so all of my extended family is still in Greece, and we would go back and spend pretty much every summer there. So I always felt really connected to my roots, I guess. And it definitely had a big effect on me in several ways. One was that from a young age, right, it broadened my perspective, and all of these kinds of things that we take for granted within our own culture, because when we're in what is familiar and normal to us, we don't even think of it as like, I'm part of a culture. We tend to think, oh, I don't even have culture. But we all do. And so it just made me aware of, from a young age, that there are like these two very different realities that I'm navigating. And that was significant to me, that the way that people thought and behaved and saw the world in one place was so different compared to another. But then also I think it created this feeling in me of like, I don't really belong anywhere, because when I was in Greece, I wasn't quite Greek enough, or I was too American, or here in the US, I'm like kind of weird. I'm a little bit too Greek. And a lot of American people don't know how to make sense of me in some ways. And so I kind of always felt like, oh, I just don't really belong. And that's played a big role in my work too, because I think ultimately the reason I even started working in intercultural education was to create space for people to feel like they belonged, no matter how different they were. So yeah, it's played a huge role.
That's amazing. I love that. And it is, you know, I find that a lot of the folks that we've had on this webinar series, and a lot of our travelers, you know, the work that they do is inspired by the challenges that they've gone through themselves, you know, and how they've been able to overcome them. And then they want to share what they've learned with others, and be a resource and the support for others. So, so you started out, you've got your Greek American, you've got this sort of no man's land in your own mind. Is that where the sense of wanderlust came from? Like, when and how did you start traveling beyond just the US and Greece?
Mm-hmm. Well, I did grow up traveling a little bit with my family, since we were going back and forth. Sometimes we would kind of visit other places. So I sort of had that experience, but it never really felt like my own. It was kind of like I'm just going along with my parents. And then when I was in university, in undergrad, I lived in something called a cultural exchange community. And basically it was an apartment complex that was designed to foster relationships between international students and domestic students. So we all kind of lived together, and I spent 3 years there. And that just played a really big role in my desire to learn more about different cultures. And yeah, I had friends from all over the world. And once that was over, like, a lot of my travels were to visit people that I had met in that community in different parts of the world. And yeah, that's kind of just when I started traveling on my own and made it my own experience, not something I shared with my family. But yeah, and then I was addicted.
And you've spent quite a bit of time since university traveling, and not just traveling, but living in places all around the world. So where exactly have you lived? I've had a hard time trying to track you, from Georgia to Greece to Thailand to where else have you been?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. So some of my longer term living situations, I guess, have been, yes, in Greece, in New Zealand, Tanzania, China, Thailand. Those are the places I've spent the most amount of time. And then, but I've also lived for, I don't know, it's kind of weird to say live. I never really know how to quantify that, but I've spent 3 to 4 months, I guess, hopping around other places, and Georgia's included in that. Puerto Rico for 6 months. Spain.
What's the longest you spent in any one spot outside the US?
Cumulatively, it would be Greece, but I don't know if that really, I mean,
Does it count?
I don't know if it count, but Thailand I've spent about 2 years total in Thailand almost.
Wow. Okay.
So.
Okay. And what this is a very, very broad question that could be an entire discussion on its own, but what are a couple of the things that you've learned about yourself, or you've learned about life, from this nomadic lifestyle that you've had?
From the nomadic lifestyle?
Would you call it nomadic?
I mean, I guess. I guess so, yeah. I have learned that it's very important for me to change up my environment every now and then to be sort of like inspired and stimulated. And there's something about starting over that like just kick starts me in some kind of way. Like I really enjoy that. But at the same time, I really need routine and stability. So even though I change my environment quite frequently, it's super quick that I develop like a routine and sort of a set of habits that stay with me for the duration of that stay. And then it's like my routine and habits just become a different set of routine and habits when I go to a new place. But I think that, yeah, there's something in there about the balance, right, of kind of between my own needs and my external environment and how
Sure.
it impacts me and all that stuff.
Yeah, yeah. It sort of reminds me of the idea of like the basic human needs, right? Not only Maslow, but just like this sort of need for balance between adventure and certainty, right? And we need varying degrees of adventure and stimulus and this sense of being alive in our life, right? But that also has to be, ideally, grounded in some degree of stability, right? And consistency. And so it's always ebbing and flowing. It's never, meant to be 50-50, but, at various points in our lives, we're constantly seeking some degree of, this sense of adventure versus sense of stability, and back and forth and back and forth. Yeah, amazing. So you're traveling the world over the past X number of years since graduation. How did that, I think it's somewhat obvious, but tell us more about how that played a role in your decision to pursue career and work as an intercultural educator?
Well, I think I kind of just fell into doing it when I was in university because I was so involved with that cultural exchange community, and I worked with the university itself to put on different events and programs for the students. So it kind of just started from there and then took different forms and different roles that I had and different types of work that I did, but there was always this intercultural, cross-cultural element woven throughout, like everything I've ever done.
What are some of the, like, define, if you will, for me, because I'm making assumptions and I think I know what you mean, but when you say intercultural education, what does that encompass? What does that include?
It is about, so bringing people of different cultural groups together to kind of establish common ground and build community and learn to understand one another. And when we talk about cultural groups, that's any group that sort of shares a set of ideas and understanding about the world and beliefs, values, perspectives. So it doesn't have to be just, let's say, Israeli versus Chinese versus Indian, right? That's not the only category of culture. It's also your age category. It's your gender identification, your social status, ethnicity, nationality, religion. These are all elements of culture, and they all have their own culture. So yeah, it's just
fascinating to think about, right?
Yeah,
as you're laying that out, there's an infinite number of groups, cultures that we're all a part of, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I know so you've got this awesome workbook / ebook / guide that it's become a bit of my Bible, and it's I love it. But you try to make the distinction in there between personal, social, and cultural identity. Mm-hmm. Is that sort of what you're hinting at here? And how do you differentiate and distinguish between those three?
Yeah. So your personal identity is more so kind of your representative of your temperament, your characteristics. You're shy, you're brave, adventurous, curious, extroverted, introverted. Then you have your, what do we say? It's the personal, the
social, and
social. Your social is like the identities of the roles that you play in your life. So the role you play within a group. So I'm the mom of a family, or I'm the sister in a family, or the goalie on a soccer team, or the CEO of a business. And then you have your cultural identities. So what faith do I belong to? What nationality do I hold? What, what race am I a part of? And again, what I said before, like gender identity, social class, all of those things. And, right. And all of your identities intersect in various ways. Right. And that's what makes you like complex, unique human you are.
Right. And I would imagine it sort of helps define the experience of life that we're having, right? Like what culture groups, the roles that we play, like our own personalities, all of that come together, as you said, and like formulates this unique experience of life that we all have. And yet you also talk a lot about, I think you call it the cultural iceberg, right? Like, so much of this is hidden below the surface, right? We can see certain things are obvious, right? Language,
Right.
et cetera, but there's a lot of stuff that's hidden. So say a little bit more about that and what that means.
Yeah, so just as in regular life, when it comes to what culture is and how we understand culture, 90% or more of it is beneath the surface of our conscious awareness. So for example, with the iceberg, when we think of what is culture, the first things that come to mind tend to be things like language, the way people dress, the foods people eat, the music people listen to. And all of that stuff is the top of the iceberg, right? What's happening above the water. But as we move down, things get kind of murkier and harder to see and harder to comprehend with conscious awareness. And that is really about why we do the things we do. And how have we been, in a sense, programmed to do things the way we do them and to think about things the way we think about them. And it's the same thing with us as individuals and the way that we show up in the world. The majority of things that we do, what drives our behavior, what drives the way we think, it's unconscious, right? It's outside of our awareness. And so, like I said, my goal is really to work on making the unconscious conscious.
So what are some of the like explicit ways that you do that? Like you have courses, you have workshops, you have coaching. Like, tell us a little bit more about how you help individuals or groups begin to make the unconscious conscious.
Mm-hmm. So I have a couple of sessions that use an assessment called the Intercultural Effectiveness Scale. And the IES, as it's also known, it assesses how effectively you engage cross-culturally. And again, this relates to any kind of cultural group, any difference, okay? So how you navigate difference. It will assess how effectively you do that, looking at a number of different dimensions. And then what I use the results of that assessment for is to help people uncover the deeper root cause of their challenges. So wherever people tend to score low, I have seen certain, let's say, patterns or tendencies that are common between people who score low in the same areas. And what we do is try to get to the root of what leads to that ineffectiveness in intercultural engagement, because again, since everything is happening so unconsciously, that challenge that a person has is usually present in other areas of their life too. It's a pattern, right? And oftentimes just not one that they're aware of. So we trace their challenges in intercultural effectiveness to things that really have absolutely nothing to do with culture at all. But just ways that they have been impacted that affect the way they see the world or the way they behave in the world. And so we look at how that shows up in this context, but in doing so, we address things that go a lot deeper and spread a lot wider, if that makes sense.
So what are some of those things that have an effect, that impact, you know?
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's a lot. And it's different for every person. There really is like a unique story with every situation. But for example, if somebody scores low on the dimension of let's see, what can I use as kind of an easy example? One dimension is exploration. So how willing are you and excited are you to get out and experience new things, meet new people, do things that are outside of your norm, I guess. And so people who tend to score low on that tend to be people who generally are uncomfortable in some way with uncertainty, or uncomfortable with change, or actually have a lack of self-trust. And so they're like too easily influenced by the external environment in a way that it can be overwhelming. So we look at, well, what is that rooted in? And that's where it's different for every person.
Got it. So you take some of these deficiencies and work with them to build up a competence in some of these areas. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is any, I used to, when I was in grad school, talked a lot about Hofstede and his like cultural dimensions. Is that something that you reference at all, or?
I do. I do talk about the dimensions. I think it's always important when I use them, I make it clear these dimensions were created by a white man from a Western perspective. I think that's important to keep in mind because there's already inherent bias there, right, with the dimensions themselves. But, and some of them I'm like, no, I don't talk about them at all because they feel just so outdated. But some of them are very applicable in ways to help us understand frameworks. And we can see pretty clearly that when you look at the dimensions compared to one another, there's a clear sort of line or framework for Western or white culture, and like basically the rest of the world follows a different framework. And there are variations within how the rest of the world does something, but it's still like a very drastically different framework than the Western world. I mean, I could literally talk for like a 2-hour workshop about just that. So,
Well, and that's a great little teaser / segue, is that for everyone listening, one of the things that we're building here behind the scenes, and Amanda and Robin and Lena and a bunch of our other coaches and experts we're putting together a series of workshops. So 90-minute workshops, one-off, and then a series of courses, so multi-week courses. So we're developing that behind the scenes. We're hoping to roll out that starting in January of 2021, but we'll make the announcements on what those courses and workshops are going to be hopefully in December. So stay tuned for that. And Lena, yeah, we're looking forward to giving you an opportunity and working with you and diving into some of this in much, much, much more depth. So yeah, awesome. One of the quotes you had in your workbook that I love, and this is exactly what we've been talking about, but is, you say, becoming aware of our cultural programming limits our tendency to project our own values, beliefs, and assumptions onto others. We project when we're unaware of what's driving our behavior. So I love that. And can you give us an example? I mean, you touched on some things here, but a specific example of one thing that might be outside of the awareness of most people, that they're just totally blind to on a day-to-day basis, and how we can become more aware of that?
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think about how deep I want to go with this. I don't know.
You can go as deep as you want.
So,
we got time.
If I ask you all, what do you think instinct is? What would you say?
Ooh, instinct. It's an unconscious reaction.
Mm-hmm.
Slash understanding.
But where does it come from? Why do you, what is its purpose?
Oh man, I feel like I'm on the hot seat here.
Anybody can answer, Robin or Amanda.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say it's like your initial or like gut reaction to something, and maybe just based on how you were brought up, and what you've learned as you're growing up in your specific situation. But yeah, I'm not sure otherwise.
Yeah, it's fascinating because you asked that question and then immediately I'm like, okay, it is this like sort of unconscious or subconscious reaction. But then to Robin's point, like, yeah, it's immediately like, what community was I brought up in, what religious traditions, what belief systems, what blah, 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 right? So I'm assuming that's where you're going with this. So I'm excited to hear more.
Yeah, well, I think generally, right, we tend to think of instinct as kind of this, almost like this element of human nature, right? Isn't that like how people talk about it? It's
Sure.
kind of like, right, oh, I just instinctively know that something.
It's human instinct to do something or
Right.
whatever, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we kind of, I don't know, think of it as something that is helping us, in a sense, assess the nature of reality. So am I safe in this situation? Am I not safe? Whatever, like, right, we're relying on our instinct somehow to show us that. But as Robin alluded to, even your instinct is based on patterns and experiences that you've had. It's also a part of your programming. It is also rooted in the unconscious, based on the environment in which you grew up. And so your instinct, it does not translate when you're in another cultural environment. So when I have like, oh, I have the sense that this isn't safe, or I have the sense that this person doesn't like me, or I've offended them in some way, or whatever it might be. Well, really, you just can't like ever make assumptions, even about something that feels like, oh, like I feel it, I know, but maybe not, because the rules don't apply anymore when you're in a different cultural environment. And that's why I think curiosity is so important. We have to ask lots of questions of yourself and of your environment and the people around you, because instinct is based upon a set of assumptions that we make, and it has a bias toward familiarity. So it can be very deceiving in a cross-cultural context. And that's why we really can't ever make assumptions about anything, because they really do make an ass out of you and me, right?
I was hoping you were going to say that. You know, what's coming up for me, what's interesting in this is that, you know, I've been doing readings, several books. Sapiens is one that I've been working my way through. I find it fascinating, but also pretty dense. But they talk a lot about, you know, and in other books as well, about our sort of like the primitive, like early human history, right? And the way that we had to survive and things we had to do to survive sort of have become ingrained in us, right? And there's this fear of like death, right? But we're not really going to die, right? Generally, if we lose our jobs or if certain things happen to us, but there's a primal instinct or a primal conditioning that something bad is going to happen, right? And so we tend to avoid those things, right? So I feel like it's almost like there's this primal sort of like human instinct, and there's the cultural thing, and then there's the personal side of things, or all the experiences that we've accumulated along the way, right? Where we've learned things subconsciously, and all of this sort of comes together. That's what we were saying at the beginning. It all comes together and forms this like reality of life that we all have. I'm not sure if that makes any sense out loud. It makes sense in my brain, but
no, it does make sense. And I think it's interesting that you bring up this thing about fear, because instinct is a product of patterning and programming. It's very much tied to the mind itself and to the more sort of logical, rational part of you, even though you don't really necessarily associate the two. And that part of you is also what creates anxiety, right? The subconscious fear and anxiety that we feel is very much about being in the mind. So another thing that I do with people is try to help them differentiate or distinguish between when am I operating from anxiety? When is this actually just my mind running around in circles versus when do I feel, or when am I tapped into intuition? Because that's different, right?
Yes, 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 absolutely. Okay, so I want to use all of this as a foundation for the next question, which is going back to the idea of traveling, right? How do you use travel as a tool for intercultural learning? Number one, and sort of part two of that is, how can travel be a tool and a catalyst for self-discovery?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, I think
You've got 30 minutes. Go.
I think as you travel, I mean, of course, you don't have to travel to be in an intercultural, cross-cultural situation or context at all. But it's so much more, I guess, the differences of different cultural contexts are a lot more obvious when you do travel. So of course, it's an opportunity to learn about different people's realities and the ways that other people have been conditioned. And by learning about that, you learn more about yourself and how you've been conditioned. And like we talk about, I don't know, language transformational travel, and I kind of, it's semantics, I know, but I don't really like the word transformational with travel, because it implies that transformation is inherent, or like that it will happen. And I think it's more transformative because it has the power to transform and the power to change. But unless you are
Sure.
being curious and practicing self-awareness and questioning your own biases and assumptions, you're not actually going to change the way you see the world or change the way you see yourself. And I've definitely met people who have traveled the world over, and when you talk to them, it's like, I feel like you've never left this one town, because your mind is still like so narrow almost. And it's because, we tend to find evidence of what we search for. So if we're expecting a certain thing from a place, then we look for the evidence of whatever it is we expect. And that's why we have to be open and curious, to acknowledging that we really don't know very much of anything at all. And so, just seeking to understand.
Yeah.
And
All right. You said 9 things there that are awesome that I want to comment
sorry.
on. No. It was amazing. But like my brain is going in a million different directions here. So like, see if I can capture 2 or 3 of these thoughts before they, one of them, right. So my previous career was as an organizational development consultant, right. And a facilitator. And one of the exercises that I always loved, right, and it was always the one that, like, if you hadn't seen it before, was I'd ask people to sit down, take a look around the room, and see how many things that they could identify that were, pick a color, red, right? And then say, great, you've got 10 seconds, go, close your eyes, keep your eyes closed. Now see if you can name 3 things that you saw that were blue, right?
Mm-hmm.
And everyone, because you're looking around for things that are red, you completely miss everything that's not red. Oftentimes you do, right? So similarly, when we're looking for things, whether it's in a personal relationship, in a professional relationship, or while we're traveling, right? If we're looking for the good or the bad or the different or the same, we're going to find it, right? And it's really about being open and curious, and, as you said, taking time to reflect and think and process, that we're able to see the full spectrum of the experience. The other thing, transformation, right? This is awesome. And this is something like, I also, in addition to co-founding ExploreX, co-founded the Transformational Travel Council. And, there's been, over the years, there's been a lot of discussion about what transformation means. And is it a process? Is it an outcome? And I think depending on how you ask, you can probably define it as both, right? I think the idea of transformational travel can be an approach to travel, right? It's what are some of the things that you're doing to enhance the likelihood, right, that you begin to see yourself and others from new perspectives, right? So things like setting intention, purposefully engaging in different ways, practicing curiosity, staying open, all the things you've talked about, right? Taking time to reflect and all of those things. And yet it also goes back to, was it truly transformational if you don't do something different as a result, right? And so it's sort of defined as both as process and as an outcome, right? If I go on a trip and I go through these steps and I come home and I begin to take really new inspired action in my life, big or small, like, yeah, I'd call that transformational, right? Similarly, of course, you don't have to go through that process. You can go on a trip and have an experience that just ends up being a transformative one for you, without going through the process. So I would say it's an ongoing discussion with lots of different viewpoints within the transformational travel community. The last thing I'll say is, and where I land on this personally, I don't want to speak for anybody else, but I don't believe that we ourselves at our core are transformed through this, right? I think, sort of to your point, we take the unconscious, it becomes conscious. We become more aware of ourselves and others, right? And in doing that, that allows us to reimagine how we're living our lives, right? So that what is transformed, if you will, is the experience of life that we're having, not necessarily who we are at our core, if that makes any sense. But it's this constant, unveiling and unfolding, and again, to use your terms, taking the unconscious and making it conscious through travel, that we begin to see ourselves in the world differently. So I love it. Go ahead, go.
I was just going to say that I think that's because it is a process of coming back to yourself. That's why who you are at your core doesn't change, but you're shedding all these layers of what you've been told you should be or should believe or whatever.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. Yeah. There's a, I won't share it now, but there's a great little example or story about that at the beginning of one of my favorite movies, documentaries, whatever, called Finding Joe. And they talk about the Golden Buddha and the story of that. And just, I always think about that when we talk about sort of just the shedding of the layers of things that have accumulated over the years. All right, we only have a few minutes left. I want to at least transition a little bit, because I know, in addition to your intercultural education work, coaching is a huge part of what you're doing day to day now. And just to give you a forum to kind of talk a little bit more about that, what are you doing? How are you working with folks? And what is your focus area when it comes to coaching specifically?
Mm-hmm. It's funny because it's not all that different. So I think the goal of my coaching work is actually to help people shed those layers and come back to the core of who they are and come closer to embodying the truth of that. And I'm using all of these tools from working in intercultural education to really do that, to help people peel back those layers and become more aware of their conditioning and their programming, and how that affects them and oftentimes leads to unhappiness. So it's just about cutting through that and coming back to the the true essence of who a person is.
Sure. And one thing that strikes me, and we'll send out a link to your coaching website when we send out the recording to everyone that signed up and registered, as well as our traveler community, so they can learn more on your site. But frankly, the thing that strikes me most, I know you've redone your site recently, but you're incredibly vulnerable on there about your own experiences. And, I think that really, it landed with me. I'm assuming it lands with a lot of other people as well, though I shouldn't make assumptions per our conversation earlier. But I would imagine it might land with others. So what role does vulnerability play in the work that you're doing?
Well, I think a big one, because right, it is very vulnerable to be yourself. That's why I think so many of us aren't, and we learn how to wear masks, and how to present versions of ourselves that are acceptable or palpable for different people. And as we do this year after year after year, we really become disconnected from the truth of who we are. And sometimes we don't even recognize like who that is or know how to tap into that. And I think it's because it's vulnerable to be your true self, because there's a difference between having the mask you wear and the persona that you play being rejected versus the truth of who you are being rejected. And I think that being vulnerable is so scary for me, and it always has been. I grew up in an environment where it just really wasn't safe for me to express myself, and it also wasn't really safe for me to talk about the things that I was going through or living through. And so much was kept inside, and when I tried to express it, I mean, I just would like really couldn't speak. All kinds of symptoms came up. It was so hard for me to be vulnerable in any way, but over time I learned how important that is in almost like liberating myself, but also giving other people permission to do the same. So I try to be really vulnerable, like in my work or even in my workshops, because I want to set the tone, and say,
All right, I think I'm back. Sorry about that. I lost you a little bit at the end there, but that was my computer issues. But no, I certainly appreciate what you're saying, Lena, and that your vulnerability and transparency certainly inspires others to do the same, for sure. So I've got two last questions for you, and then I'm going to hand it over to Robin for some quick rapid fire questions. One would be, is there one thing or something that you do when you travel that allows you to really dive in, get curious, practice openness, and really explore at a deeper level? Robin, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. All right. It looks like we're having some tech issues here. Oh. Lena, are you back?
Yeah. Can you see me, hear me?
Yes. Well, ish.
Uh-oh.
Okay, there we go. I think we've got you now. Okay. So did you hear my question?
No.
Excellent. I'm going to skip the one question, and then I'm just going to get to the last question, which is, if you could impart any words of wisdom on our travelers in our community, what might they be?
I got yeah, I guess going back to some things I've said before, that curiosity is the key to connection.
Love it. And we'll be able to dive more into that again, just to tease what's coming up. You will dive much more and deeper into that when we have our workshops and courses coming up soon. So for all those that see this and are curious and want to learn more and hear more, and you'll have an opportunity to do that with Lena coming up soon. So Robin, you want to do some rapid fire?
Yeah, Lena, I have a few questions for you that just to wrap things up, and we'll just ask you to answer with the first thing that comes to mind. Nothing to worry about. If you could go anywhere in the world right now, where would you go and why?
Yeah, I've been really missing Thailand. It's where I want to be right now. So,
Yeah.
I just love it so much. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I have a follow-up. What do you miss most about it in 10 words or less?
Oh, I don't know. It just, for me at least, it has such a good energy, a good vibe. I really like Thai people. I love the food. I just feel good there. Mm-hmm.
Cool. Yeah, I've heard that about Thailand and I've never been, but I'd love to get over there. What has been, speaking of food, what's been maybe your most memorable or your favorite meal while you've been traveling?
Oh.
Type of food.
This is hard because I feel like I plan my days around food when I travel.
That's my everyday.
Yeah. Honestly, I think something that stands out for me is just in India, how good everything was and how easy it was to eat vegetarian food all the time, and just like to never feel like I was missing something. And then when I came back from that trip, I was like, yeah, I'm not gonna eat meat like I was before, and I was like, oh, it's really not the same though. It's just different there.
Wow, that's interesting. I wonder what it is about like the difference between their food options and ours.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So, and what's one essential item you always bring with you while you're traveling?
I always have to have like a hanging shower thing, like those little things that open up and you can hang them anywhere, because they're just the best.
Yeah.
And if you have a shower like this and you need your things, you just hang it right there and it's close.
Like with all your toiletries and stuff?
Yeah.
Yes, I know what you're talking about. Those are great. Okay, two more. If you were to summarize your philosophy in a word or a short phrase, what would you say that would be?
Alignment.
Wow. Okay.
I like that.
Do you want to elaborate?
No, this is rapid fire. No.
Okay. This is rapid fire. You're right. I always want to ask follow-up questions. What is one okay, and then going back to our question of the day, what's one cultural experience that you've had that's deeply impacted you?
Again, you have 90 minutes. Go.
It was, I think that the time that I spent living in Tanzania was really eye-opening for me in so many ways. Yeah, so much I could say, but I think particularly when it comes to power and my privilege as a white woman, that experience just brought a lot of things to the fore that I had never thought about before, and went on to play like a really significant role in the way that I do my work and in the types of things that people would come and ask me for. So, yeah, that was a pretty significant one.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Lena. Thanks, Robin. Lena, thank you again so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Tons of fun, and look forward to working with you on as we move forward together, both in coaching and in our workshops and courses. As I said, we'll send out a link to your website as we send out the recording to everyone that registered and to our traveler community afterwards. So they'll have an opportunity to visit your website. If anyone does want to connect with you via email, they can reach you at lena@explorer-x.com. Of course, general inquiries can be sent to travel@explorer-x.com. Follow us on social @GoExplorerX. And then next week, we've got our good friend Court Whalen here, noon Pacific time, 3 p.m. Eastern, next Wednesday. So we'll be having a great conversation with Court on conservation, photography, and everything in between. So again, Lena, thank you so much. We appreciate it. And yeah, we look forward to talking to you soon.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you,
me.
Lena.
Thank you.
All right. See ya.